The Mayor is with us this evening, and you can join in on the conversation on Twitter at BBC London News. Sadiq Khan, welcome. Thank you very much for being here with us this evening. Now, look, by far the biggest issue to our viewers is the cost. A lot of people are expressing concern that the ULEZ is an unfair tax. The people who own older, more polluting cars are usually the least likely to be able to afford an upgraded car. Let's hear from Anya.
Does Mr Khan think it's responsible and the right time to introduce the expansion of the ULEZ now? The pandemic has left many out of work and in debt, and they cannot afford to buy a new car, let alone pay £12.50 every time they need to drive.
What do you say to Anya and all those people who are really feeling the pinch?
Well, I thank Anya for her question. You can't see the toxic air in London. But what I can tell you is that each year more than 4,000 Londoners die prematurely because of the toxic air. There are many children who've got permanently stunted lungs because of this invisible killer, but also adults with a whole host of health issues from asthma, cancer, heart disease, dementia. We are facing an air pollution crisis. And what Anya says is right. We are now hopefully coming out of an awful pandemic, a COVID crisis. What I don't want is to replace one crisis, a COVID health crisis, with another one caused by air quality. And the good news is our policies in central London, where the Ultra Low Emission Zone began from 2019, has shown before the pandemic, we reduced the toxic air in London by 50%. And guess who suffers the worst consequences of this poisonous air? It's the poorest Londoners, least likely to own a car. And when we expand the ULEZ from Monday, 6 out of 10 of those people in the expanded area don't even own a car. And it's those poorest Londoners, least likely to own a car, who suffer the worst consequences.
OK, well, let's go to our next question. It comes from Keith, and he says, with a new ULEZ scheme, it will still be OK to drive an older polluting car in the zone as long as you pay. Why doesn't Sadiq Khan ban older polluting cars and make a real difference? How committed to this are you? In theory, everybody could pay this and there will be no difference to the pollution levels at all.
On the one hand, I'm being criticised for not going far enough. On the other hand, I'm being criticised for going too far. Look, what we've shown from the world-leading ULEZ that began in 2019 is the amount of compliant vehicles has shot up. When I first announced the policy in 2017 with the date, only 37% of vehicles inside the ultra low emission zone area were compliant. It's now more than 80%. But also we've seen fewer vehicles coming into central London, on average 24,000 a day. And that's led to the air improving in central London. I want all of London to benefit from clean air.
I think the concern, though, is, and this is the reason you're getting criticism on both sides potentially, is that people suspect that this is a revenue-generating scheme, that you're in it for the money, so to speak.
Yeah, look, one of the things we're keen to do is actually for nobody to have to pay the ultra low emission zone because their cars are compliant or because they choose to walk, cycle or use public transport. The good news is the evidence from the first 2 years of ULEZ before the pandemic is that people were choosing to leave their polluting cars at home. They were either scrapping it. More than 12,000 vehicles have been scrapped because of our policies, and more people were walking, cycling, using public transport. We want all of London to benefit from our policies. OK,
let's move on now to the next area, the thorny issue of exemptions. Basically, there aren't any exemptions, are there? Here's an email from Samantha, who says, has the Mayor given any thoughts to those police officers, paramedics and hospital staff who need to get to work in the ULEZ zone during unsociable hours when TfL does not operate? What would our key workers have done whilst we were all clapping for them if the ULEZ had been in place there?
That's one of the reasons why I suspended the charges in central London, because the pandemic required heroes to get to work when public transport wasn't running. The good news is TfL is running. The night bus is more than 100 routes during the course of the night now. The night tube is coming back next month, but we have exempt the blue light services vehicles who haven't yet gone electric.
But not the people, and we're still very much in the pandemic, and it could get a lot worse, couldn't it?
Well, the good news for our police officers, they get free travel on public transport. What we are doing is working with the police, the fire, NHS. I spoke today to the head of the NHS in London. GPs, doctors, those across the NHS welcome our policies. You know why? Because they see the consequences of those suffering from toxic air in London. They see the children with asthma. They see the children with bronchitis. They see the adult whose dementia and heart disease and cancer has been accelerated by this awful toxic air in London.
Let me just continue with this thought, though. We've got an email from Suzanne who says, your ULEZ scheme offers zero support for vulnerable people and blue badge users. Why haven't you allowed exemptions for vulnerable people with disabilities?
We have, and I'd encourage the emailer to go to the TfL website. So those who've got illnesses, certain illnesses, are exempt and get a reimbursement from the NHS. Those who've got vehicles adapted because they're disabled have got exemptions. The scrappage scheme that I've got from City Hall, £61 million, is for disabled Londoners, low-income Londoners and charities. So in the absence of any support from the government, we have got policies to help those disabled Londoners and those who are the most vulnerable. By the way, those are the people who suffer the worst consequences from toxic air.
OK, thank you very much. Just a pause to remind you that you're watching a special BBC London programme this Thursday evening looking at the Ultra Low Emission Zone, which is introduced on Monday. Tonight we're joined, as you can see, by the Mayor, and you can join in on the conversation on Twitter at BBC London News. Now, we're going to hear from Victoria because she wants to make a point about the fact that we're trying to have a greener city and yet you are putting your support for a new tunnel for cars.
Your Silvertown tunnel has got no cycling through it. What we need is a cycling bridge, not an HGV tunnel. It's got dedicated HGV lanes. It's going to bring more traffic to Greenwich and Newham. So why not use COP26 as a good excuse to pause and review this toxic scheme?
The new car tunnel is going to encourage more cars.
Well, no, it's a new bus tunnel. There are 2 lanes reserved for double-decker buses, but also people from one side can go to the other side if they're walking and cycling. What you didn't show in the film was the consequences of the Blackwall Tunnel, the only crossing in that part of London, being closed 700 times on average a year. A 5-minute closure of that tunnel leads to a 3-mile tailback. Congestion, air pollution, toxic air. What the Silvertown Tunnel is going to do is have 2 lanes on either side reserved for double-decker buses, 37 double-decker buses an hour. The Silvertown Tunnel will be in the expanded Ultra Low Emission Zone, and there'll be a toll applied as well. So we get less traffic, less congestion, better air quality, solving one of the problems that exists in that part of London. OK, let's hear now from Joe, who's emailed us to say what is being done to connect the outer boroughs of London. You can't deny that public transport is more scarce in outer London. Those people are more likely to need to use their car. What are you doing to help them? Well, one of the things I did yesterday was speak to 3 leaders from South West London because obviously I'm keen to make sure all of our city benefits from clean air in London. I speak regularly to council leaders, energy leaders across our city. One of the reasons why I've expanded the Ultra Low Emission Zone from central London, a huge opposition from the Conservatives, to North Circular and South Circular, is because I want all of Londoners to benefit from the clean air central London is seeing. What King's College say is, in the absence of my policies, it will take 193 years to make the air in London lawful. With my policies, we can do it in 6 years. Let's talk about the green alternatives to driving. E-scooters have been in the headlines a lot, haven't they? We're currently having plenty of trials all around London. We're seeing them a lot, but privately owned e-scooters are banned. This is what Brett has to say.
Hello, Mr. Khan. My question is, why, when there is a climate emergency, can we not create an amnesty like New York did for private e-scooter and micro-mobility owners to use their devices?
What do you have to say to Brett?
The short answer is e-scooters are currently against the law, government legislation, which I support. The only lawful e-scooters are the ones that councils have that we're piloting. Why are we doing that? Because we are concerned about the unintended consequences of a proliferation of e-scooters without proper regulation. 4 people have been killed or seriously injured because of these illegal e-scooters. All e-scooters are unlawful on the pavements. And this pilot from the government, which we support, will give us a chance to see what works. And so we can have proper legislation, proper regulation, proper safeguards, hopefully next year, and roll them out. OK. Our next question is a very common one. Anna says, can you tell me why there are so few charging points for electric cars in London? Well, here's the good news. Since I've been mayor, we've managed to increase the number of charging points in London, now more than 7,000. A third of the country's charging points are, guess where? in London. We also have more than 300 rapid charging points. It takes you 15 minutes, more than any city in Western Europe.
It's nowhere near what it needs to be, though. If you want as many people as possible who have to drive to have electric cars, 7,000 charging points isn't going to cut it.
Oh, it does. It's more than enough capacity now. The key issue is to make sure we meet the demand. And the good news is, with technology improving, with the battery of a new car being longer than an older car, we're meeting the demands we have. But you're right, we've got to increase the number of charging points, increase the amount of rapid charging points, but also increase the numbers of people walking and cycling using public transport as well as electric vehicles.
Let's talk about the timing of this. Obviously, these are very difficult times. People are struggling financially, but it's also a risky thing for many people to take public transport. Let's hear from Joe.
With this introduction of the scheme, my car is no longer compliant, which drives that price right up and kind of gives me no option but to go onto public transport, which as a vulnerable person I don't feel safe, secure doing, especially as we're hearing in the news the cases are rising. Wonder if we wouldn't be better waiting until next year when the pandemic has hopefully cleared out a little bit and we can tackle the emissions then.
Well, Joe, thanks for your question. Look, this is a matter of life and death. Air pollution. More than 4,000 premature deaths a year. I spoke today to Rosamond Kissy Deborah, whose daughter Ella passed away a few years ago, and the coroner concluded that air pollution was a material factor to her death. We can't afford to wait any longer. So what we're doing is making sure we've got record numbers of buses running across London during the night. We're making sure the night tube comes back next month. We're supporting the capacity we've got in London with public transport, encouraging those to walk and cycle who can, and those who are vulnerable.
The people who
need
are
to use their
shielding,
car,
you're forcing them onto the tube.
Well, no, those who are vulnerable, who are eligible, get the NHS reimbursement scheme. There are other schemes that they get in relation to scrappage scheme to move to cleaner vehicles. But one of the reasons we're doing the Ultra Low Emission Zone is to encourage people to not having vehicles that are polluting. And if they do have vehicles that are polluting and the rest of us are suffering as a consequence of that, particularly the children, poor Londoners, those that don't own the car, you should pay for that.
Sadiq Khan, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. Thank you very much for being with us this evening and answering our viewers' questions. Thank you. And thank you to all of you who've got in touch via email. And if you want to find out more about the ULEZ, scan the QR code on your screens now. And that will take you to TfL's website, which has all the information. And of course, there's plenty more on our website.